She was nothing more than a name on a hospital staffing list. No connections, no prestigious medical degree from Cambridge or Johns Hopkins. Just steady hands, a quiet voice, and 20 years of caring for patients that others had given up on. But when Mariam Osei walked into the sprawling Riyadh mansion of oil magnate Hassan al-Rashid, she had no idea she was about to become the center of a family storm that would tear apart one of Saudi Arabia's most powerful dynasties. The old man was dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, 6 months to live if he was lucky. His son Omar, worth $12 billion and owner of half the refineries between Kuwait and Yemen, had hired the best oncologists money could buy. Swiss specialists flew in. On private jets, experimental treatments were shipped from Tokyo in refrigerated cases, but nothing could stop the inevitable. What Omar didn't expect was that this quiet African woman, who charged a fraction of what the European nurses demanded, would become the one person his father trusted most in his final months. And he certainly never imagined that her presence would unlock secrets buried deeper than oil wells, secrets that would change everything he thought he knew about his family, his inheritance, and himself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Hassan al-Rashid had built his empire the old way, with his bare hands, ruthless determination, and a willingness to make deals that other men wouldn't dare touch. From a small trading post in Jeddah, he had transformed himself into a titan who controlled oil flows across 3 continents. Presidents called him, kings sought his counsel. But now, at 78, lying in a hospital bed that cost more than most people's houses, none of that power meant anything. The cancer had spread like wildfire through his organs. Chemotherapy left him weak and nauseated. Radiation burned his skin. The parade of specialists spoke in medical terminology that sounded like a foreign language, even though they were supposedly there to help him prepare for death with dignity. His son, Omar, paced the marble floors of the family compound. Like a caged panther, Omar had inherited his father's business acumen, but lacked his emotional fortitude. Where Hassan had been steady under pressure, Omar was volatile. Where Hassan had been calculating, Omar was impulsive. The thought of losing his father, and more importantly, the thought of taking full control of a business empire that employed 40,000 people across 17 countries, terrified him. The nurses from Geneva aren't working out, Omar told his wife Layla over dinner in their private dining room. A chandelier worth $500,000 casting prismatic light across untouched plates of lamb and saffron rice. Father refuses to let them touch him. He says they smell like antiseptic and treat him like a specimen. Layla, a former model from Beirut who had married into the al-Rashid fortune 15 years earlier, stirred her food absently. She had grown accustomed to luxury, but the stress of Hassan's illness was wearing on everyone. The old man had never fully accepted her, seeing her as too Western, too modern for his traditional son. Now, with death approaching, family tensions were surfacing like crude oil under pressure. What about the British agency, she suggested. They specialize in high-net-worth clients. Too clinical. Father wants someone who will treat him like a human being, not a bank account with a pulse. Omar's sister Zara chose that moment to enter, her abaya rustling against the polished floor. At 42, she was 3 years older than Omar and had never married, dedicating her life instead to managing the family's charitable foundation. She possessed their father's sharp intelligence and their mother's stubborn streak, a combination that made her formidable in boardrooms and impossible to ignore in family discussions. "I may have found someone," she announced without preamble. "A Ghanaian nurse named Mariam Osei. She works at King Faisal Hospital, specializes in palliative care, and has outstanding references." Omar looked skeptical. "A local hire? Zahra, we..." Need someone with international experience, someone who understands discretion when dealing with, someone who understands that our father is dying and needs compassion, not a resume, Zara interrupted. Dr. Mansouri at the hospital says she's exceptional. Patients who were ready to give up start fighting again under her care. Families who were falling apart find peace. What's her background? Layla asked, practical as always. Zara consulted her phone. Born in Kumasi, Ghana, trained as a nurse in Accra, then worked in several African countries before coming to Saudi Arabia 8 years ago. She's been at King Faisal for 5 years, primarily in the oncology ward. No complaints, exemplary record, speaks fluent Arabic. And English, Omar frowned. Something about hiring a foreign nurse felt wrong to him, though he couldn't articulate why. His father had always been particular about who entered their inner circle. The al-Rashid family had enemies, business rivals, political opponents, people who would pay handsomely for inside information about Hassan's condition or the succession plans for the company. We don't know anything about her personal life, he said. Her motivations, her family situation, whether she might be vulnerable to outside influences. Omar, Zara's voice carried a warning edge. Father is in pain. He's frightened, though he'll never admit it. He needs someone who can help him face what's coming with dignity. This isn't about business security. It's about our father's final months. But Omar's mind was already racing through worst-case scenarios. What if this nurse was planted by competitors seeking intelligence about the company's succession plans? What if she had connections to journalists looking for an inside story about the al-Rashid family's private affairs? What if she was simply incompetent and his father suffered because Omar had been too trusting? The weight of the decision pressed down on him. Every choice felt loaded with consequences he couldn't foresee. His father's empire had been built on calculated risks, but this felt different. This was personal. Later that evening, Omar stood in his father's bedroom, watching the rise and fall of the old man's chest. Hassan had lost 30 pounds in the past 2 months. His skin had taken on a yellowish tint that the doctors said was common with pancreatic cancer. But his eyes, when they were open, still held the sharp intelligence that had intimidated oil. Ministers and heads of state. The Geneva nurses quit, Hassan said without opening his eyes, his voice a whisper but still carrying authority. I know, Father. We're looking for alternatives. No more foreigners who see only a dying rich man. Find someone who understands that dignity matters more than diplomas. Omar hesitated. Zara has found a candidate, a Ghanaian nurse from King Faisal Hospital, but I'm concerned about security, about... Hassan's eyes opened, fixing on his son with an intensity that made Omar step back. You think I've survived 78 years in this business by being careless about who I trust? Of course not, but bring her tomorrow. Let me see for myself. It wasn't a request. Even weakened by disease, Hassan al-Rashid was still the patriarch of the family, still the final authority on all major decisions. Omar nodded, knowing the conversation was over. That night he called the head of his security team and ordered a comprehensive background check on Mariam Osei. Bank records, employment history, family connections, social media presence, everything. If this woman was going to be in his father's presence during his most vulnerable moments, Omar would know exactly who she was and what she wanted. What he didn't anticipate was how little those reports would prepare him for the woman who would walk through their gates the next morning, carrying nothing but a small leather bag and a calm presence that seemed to fill every room she entered. And he certainly couldn't have predicted that within weeks this unassuming African nurse would become the keeper of secrets that would turn his entire world upside down. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mariam Osei arrived at the al-Rashid compound at precisely 8 a.m. as instructed. She had taken 3 buses from her modest apartment in the expatriate quarter of Riyadh, her starched white uniform pressed and spotless despite the journey. The security guard at the main gate scrutinized her identification twice before waving her through, and as she walked up the marble pathway lined with imported palm trees, she felt the weight of surveillance cameras tracking her every step. The mansion itself was a testament to Hassan al-Rashid's success, a modern interpretation of traditional Islamic architecture, with soaring arches and geometric patterns carved into golden limestone. Water features cascaded down terraced gardens, and the morning sun reflected off windows that seemed to stretch toward the heavens. Mariam had seen wealth before during her years at King Faisal Hospital, but nothing quite like this. Omar met her at the carved wooden entrance doors, his expensive suit crisp despite the early hour. He was tall and lean like his father, with prematurely grey hair and intense dark eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of her appearance. Behind him stood a woman Mariam assumed was his wife, elegantly dressed, with the kind of natural beauty that suggested careful maintenance and unlimited resources. "Ms. Osei," Omar said, extending his hand formally. "I am Omar al-Rashid. This is my wife, Layla. Thank you for coming." Mariam shook his hand with a firm grip, maintaining eye contact. In her years working with wealthy families, she had learned that confidence without arrogance opened more doors than deference. "Thank you for considering me, Mr. al-Rashid. I understand your father has specific needs." "He does," Omar replied, leading her through a foyer dominated by a chandelier that probably cost more than most people earned in a decade. "Before we proceed, I must ask, are you comfortable working in challenging emotional circumstances?" "My father is not an easy patient," Mariam smiled slightly. "In Ghana, I cared for my grandmother through her final illness when I was 16. She was the village chief's mother, proud and stubborn, and she fought death every step of the way. I learned early that dignity and comfort matter more than compliance." Something in her tone seemed to ease Omar's tension marginally. They climbed a curved staircase lined with oil paintings, desert scenes and portraits of Arab leaders from decades past. At the top, Omar paused outside an oak door carved with intricate calligraphy. "My father built his business by reading people quickly and accurately," he said quietly. "He will test you, not medically, but personally. He needs to trust you completely, or this arrangement won't work." Mariam nodded. "I understand." Omar knocked once and entered without waiting for a response. The bedroom was larger than Mariam's entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the compound's gardens. The furniture was a mixture of traditional Arabic pieces and modern medical equipment. An ornate wooden chest sat next to an IV stand, while Persian rugs covered floors that accommodated a hospital bed and monitoring devices. Hassan al-Rashid lay propped against pillows, wearing silk pajamas that hung loosely on his diminished frame. His face was gaunt, marked by the ravages of chemotherapy, but his eyes were alert and calculating. He studied Mariam for a long moment before speaking. "You are younger than I expected," he said in Arabic, his voice barely above a whisper. "Age doesn't determine compassion, sir," Mariam replied in the same language, her accent carrying the musical lilt of her homeland, but her grammar precise. Hassan's eyebrows rose slightly. "Your Arabic is excellent for someone from West Africa." "Language is a bridge, Mr. al-Rashid. I've found that caring for someone becomes much easier when you can speak to them in their heart language." For the first time since entering the room, Hassan smiled, a small expression that transformed his entire face. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to a chair beside the bed. Mariam settled herself comfortably, neither too close nor too distant. She had learned to read the subtle signals patients sent, about their need for space or connection. Hassan studied, her face with the intensity of a man accustomed to making million-dollar decisions based on first impressions. "Tell me about death," he said suddenly. The question hung in the air like incense. Omar shifted uncomfortably near the door, clearly wanting to intervene, but Mariam remained calm. "Death is a journey, not a destination," she said simply. "In my culture, we believe the ancestors guide us through the transition. The body may fail, but the spirit continues. My role is to ensure that journey happens with as much peace and dignity as possible." Hassan nodded slowly. "The Swiss nurses spoke only of pain management and medication schedules. They treated my body like a machine breaking down. Your body is breaking down," Mariam said gently, "but you are not just a body. You have memories, relationships, unfinished business. My job is to care for all of you, not just the parts that hurt." The old man's eyes sharpened. "What do you know about my unfinished business?" It was clearly a test. Mariam smiled. "Nothing and everything. I know you're a father worried about your children's future. I know you're a man who built something significant and wants to ensure it survives. I know you're probably frustrated that your body is failing while your mind remains sharp. Beyond that, you'll tell me what you choose to share." Hassan was quiet for several minutes, his breathing labored but steady. Finally, he looked past Mariam to his son. "Omar, leave us alone." "Father, I don't think—" "Leave, now." Omar's jaw tightened, but he obeyed, closing the door behind him with barely controlled frustration. Mariam remained still, understanding that this was a crucial moment in establishing trust. "My son is afraid," Hassan said once they were alone. "Afraid of losing me, afraid of taking over the business, afraid of making the wrong decisions. Fear makes him suspicious of everyone." "That's natural," Mariam replied. "Grief often begins before death arrives." "He had me investigated," Hassan continued, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Background checks, financial records, even your social media accounts, though I suspect you don't use such things much." Mariam shook her head. "I prefer face-to-face conversations." "What he doesn't understand is that I've been having my own investigations conducted. Not into your past, but into your present. Dr. Mansouri speaks very highly of you. More importantly, so do the patients you've cared for. They describe you as someone who listens not just to words, but to silences. Silence often contains more truth than speech," Mariam agreed. Hassan reached for a glass of water on his bedside table, his hand trembling slightly. Without being asked, Mariam stood and helped guide the glass to his lips, supporting his hand with gentle firmness. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about her instinctive understanding of when to help and when to allow independence. "There are things about my family that will surprise you," Hassan said after drinking. "Secrets that have been buried for decades. Some of them will surface during my final months, whether I want them to or not. Can you handle being in the middle of family drama? I've found that families often say things to nurses that they won't say to each other," Mariam replied. "I don't judge, and I don't repeat confidences unless someone's safety is at risk." Hassan studied her face intently. "There will be pressures. My son will want information about my condition, my mental state, my conversations. Other family members may try to use you as a source of intelligence. Business associates will attempt to gain access through you. Can you resist such pressures?" "My loyalty is to my patient, not to the people around him," Mariam said firmly. "If you tell me something, in confidence, it stays between us." The old man nodded, seemingly satisfied. "There's one more thing you should know. I am not a man who accepts help easily. I will resist your care, argue with your instructions, and probably insult your intelligence on more than one occasion. This has nothing to do with you personally. And everything to do with my hatred of being dependent on others, Mariam smiled. My grandmother once threw a bowl of soup at me because I tried to feed her like a child. The next day, she apologized and explained that she wasn't angry at me. She was angry at her body for betraying her. I understood. For the first time since she'd entered the room, Hassan laughed, a sound like autumn leaves rustling. I think we will get along well, Mariam Osei. I hope so, Mr. al-Rashid. Hassan, if you're going to help me die with dignity, we should be on a first-name basis. When Omar was finally allowed back into the room 20 minutes later, he found his father sitting more upright than he had in weeks, engaged in quiet conversation with Mariam about traditional Ghanaian music. The transformation was subtle, but unmistakable. Hassan seemed more present, more connected to the moment than he had since his diagnosis. She'll start tomorrow, Hassan announced without preamble. 8-hour shifts daily. Zara will handle the paperwork and compensation. Omar nodded, though Mariam could see the concern still etched in his features. As she prepared to leave, Hassan caught her hand. Mariam, he said quietly, ensuring Omar couldn't hear, there are documents in this house that could change many lives. When the time comes, you may be the only person in a position to ensure they reach the right hands. Will you remember that? Mariam looked into his eyes, seeing not just a dying man, but someone carrying the weight of significant secrets. I'll remember, she promised. As she left the al-Rashid compound that morning, Mariam felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and responsibility that came with taking on a new patient. But something about Hassan's final words suggested this assignment would be unlike anything she'd experienced before. She had no idea that within days she would become the keeper of secrets that would tear the al-Rashid family apart, and ultimately bring them back together in ways none of them could imagine. 3 weeks into Mariam's employment, Omar al-Rashid sat in his private office reviewing security footage for the 3rd time that morning. The room was a shrine to modern technology and old-world power. Curved monitors displayed real-time feeds from 47 cameras positioned throughout the compound, while behind him, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Riyadh's skyline that few people would ever see. The camera system had been installed 5 years earlier, after a business rival had attempted industrial espionage by bribing household staff. Omar had spared no expense, hiring a security firm that specialized in protecting heads of state. Every room except the bathrooms and prayer areas was monitored, with feeds automatically archived and backed up to encrypted servers in Switzerland. What he was watching now, however, had nothing to do with corporate security. On the main monitor, Mariam moved through his father's bedroom with the fluid efficiency of someone completely comfortable in her environment. She was helping Hassan with his morning medications, but instead of the clinical routine Omar had witnessed with previous nurses, this looked more like a conversation between old friends. Hassan was actually smiling, something Omar hadn't seen since before the cancer diagnosis. Sir? His assistant Khalil knocked and entered without waiting for permission. A thin man in his 30s, with wire-rimmed glasses, and the perpetually anxious expression of someone who managed the schedules of billionaires. Khalil carried an iPad and wore the kind of expensive suit that suggested Omar paid him very well for his discretion. "The security reports you requested," Khalil said, setting a leather folder on the mahogany desk. "Background checks on Ms. Osei's family members, financial analysis of her bank accounts, and surveillance logs from her apartment building." Omar opened the folder reluctantly. Part of him felt guilty about investigating someone who was clearly helping his father, but another part, the part that had inherited Hassan's paranoia along with his business acumen, couldn't shake the feeling that Mariam's presence was too convenient, too perfect. The first document was a financial profile, Mariam lived modestly, sending 60% of her salary to family members in Ghana, while maintaining minimal expenses in Riyadh. Her largest purchase in the past year had been a plane ticket to Accra, when her nephew had been hospitalized with malaria. No suspicious deposits, no unexplained income, no red flags that suggested she was receiving money from outside sources. The family background was equally mundane. Parents both deceased, 2 sisters and a brother still living in Ghana, all employed in respectable but unremarkable jobs. One sister was a primary school teacher, the other managed a small textile shop, and her brother worked as a mechanic in Kumasi. None of them had criminal records or political connections that might make Mariam vulnerable to coercion. "What about the surveillance logs?" Omar asked, though he was beginning to feel foolish for pursuing this line of investigation. "She leads a very quiet life, sir. Work, grocery shopping, weekly calls to family via internet cafe, occasional attendance at the Methodist church in the diplomatic quarter. No social life to speak of, no romantic relationships, no suspicious contacts." Omar closed the folder and turned back to the monitors. On screen, Mariam was now reading to his father from what appeared to be a leather-bound book, not a medical text or newspaper, but something that was making Hassan laugh. When was the last time his father had laughed? "There's one more thing." "Sir?" Khalil said hesitantly. The IT department noticed something unusual in the server logs. Omar's attention sharpened. "What kind of unusual?" "Someone has been accessing the camera feeds from an external IP address. Not recently. The last access was 3 months ago, before Ms. Osei was hired. But it appears someone had been watching the house." The room suddenly felt colder. "How is that possible? The system is supposed to be secure." "It was an inside job, sir. Someone with legitimate access credentials was copying feeds and transmitting them to an encrypted server in Cyprus. We've traced the activity back to a specific user account, but—" Khalil paused, looking uncomfortable. "But what?" "The account belongs to your sister Zara." Omar stared at the screen, his mind racing. Zara had been accessing the security cameras. Why would she need to spy on her own family? Unless— "Pull up the archived footage from 3 months ago," he commanded. "I want to see exactly what she was watching." As Khalil worked at the computer, Omar's phone buzzed with a text message from his father. "Come upstairs. Bring Zara. We need to talk." The timing felt ominous. 20 minutes later, Omar and Zara sat in their father's bedroom while Mariam prepared tea in the adjoining sitting area. Hassan had insisted she stay within earshot, unusual, since family meetings were typically private affairs, but then again, nothing about the past few weeks had been typical. "I've been thinking about the company's future," Hassan began, his voice stronger than it had been in months. "About succession planning, about ensuring the business survives my death intact." Omar leaned forward. This was the conversation he'd been hoping for and dreading in equal measure. "Father, we've discussed this. The board of directors has already approved the transition plan. I'll assume control as CEO, with Zahra managing the charitable foundation and maintaining her board seat." Hassan's expression was unreadable. "Plans change, Omar. Circumstances evolve. I've been reconsidering some of my earlier decisions." Zahra, who had been unusually quiet since entering the room, finally spoke. "What kind of reconsiderations, father?" "The kind that might surprise you both," Hassan replied cryptically. "Tell me, Zahra, have you been monitoring the household security cameras?" The question hung in the air, like smoke from a funeral pyre. Zahra's face went pale, confirming Omar's suspicions before she even opened her mouth. Yes, occasionally. I was concerned about your security, about making sure the staff wasn't taking advantage." "For 3 months," Hassan interrupted. "Every day, sometimes for hours at a time. That's not casual concern, daughter. That's surveillance." Omar felt a cold fury building in his chest. "You've been spying on us? On our own family?" "Not spying," Zara said defensively. "Protecting. Omar, you have no idea what goes on in this house when you're at the office. Father has been having visitors, people you don't know about, conversations you're not aware of." "What visitors?" Omar demanded, but Hassan raised his hand for silence. "Answer the question, Zara. Why were you watching?" Zara's composure cracked slightly. "Because I know about the will, Father. The real will, not the one your lawyers filed with the courts, but the one you've been working on with that attorney from London, the one that changes everything." The room fell silent except for the soft clinking of china as Mariam continued preparing tea in the next room. Omar felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "What is she talking about, Father?" Hassan's eyes moved between his children, and for the first time since his diagnosis, he looked truly tired. "There are things about our family's wealth that neither of you know. Money that came from sources you've never questioned. Partnerships that were formed in desperation and maintained through necessity." "I don't understand," Omar said, though a part of him was beginning to. "The oil business has always been political, son. Success requires relationships with people who operate in grey areas. Some of the deals I made in the early years, let's say they involved individuals whose money was not entirely clean." Zara leaned back in her chair, vindicated. "Money laundering, that's what you're talking about, isn't it? You use the business to clean dirty money for arms dealers, drug cartels, corrupt politicians. I did what was necessary to build something that would provide for my family for generations," Hassan said firmly. "But yes, some of our early capital came from questionable sources, and some of those sources expect continued cooperation." Omar's world tilted on its axis. Everything he thought he knew about his inheritance, about his father's empire, was apparently built on foundations of sand and blood. "How much of the company is compromised?" "About 30% of our assets can be traced back to laundered funds," Hassan admitted. "If the wrong people decided to talk, or if certain investigations were reopened, the entire business could be seized by international authorities." "And the new will?" Zara asked quietly. Hassan looked toward the sitting room where Mariam was now arranging cups on a silver tray. "The new will transfers those compromised assets to a charitable foundation that will be immune from seizure. Clean money stays with the family business. Dirty money gets donated to hospitals, schools, orphanages, transformed from something shameful into something that helps people." "But that's billions of dollars," Omar protested. "You're talking about giving away a third of our wealth." "I'm talking about protecting the other 2/3, Hassan corrected, "and ensuring that when I die, I don't leave you both vulnerable to prosecution as accessories to crimes you never knew were committed." Mariam entered with the tea tray, moving as quietly as always. But Omar noticed something he hadn't seen before. She was listening intently to every word, her expression thoughtful rather than neutral. How much did she understand about what they were discussing? "There's something else," Hassan continued, once Mariam had served the tea and returned to her position near the window. "The new will names a trustee for the charitable foundation, someone outside the family, someone with no financial interest in our business, someone who can't be accused of bias or corruption." Omar's blood turned to ice as he realized where this was heading. "Father, please tell me you're not about to say what I think you're about to say." Hassan's eyes met Mariam's across the room, and she nodded almost imperceptibly, a gesture so subtle that Omar almost missed it. "The trustee will be Mariam Osei," Hassan announced. "She will control 30% of the al-Rashid fortune, with instructions to distribute it to worthy causes over the next 20 years. The teacup slipped from Omar's hand, shattering against the marble floor in a crash that seemed to echo through the entire house. The shattered teacup on the marble floor seemed to mirror the state of the al-Rashid family in the aftermath of Hassan's announcement. For 30 seconds, nobody moved. Omar stared at his father with the expression of a man who had just watched his entire world collapse. Zara sat frozen, her face cycling through emotions. Shock, calculation, and something that might have been relief. Only Mariam remained calm, quietly cleaning up the broken porcelain, as if billion-dollar inheritance announcements were routine parts of her nursing duties. "You cannot be serious," Omar finally managed, his voice barely controlled. "You're going to hand over 30% of our family's wealth to a woman we met 3 weeks ago." Hassan's response was measured, deliberate. "I'm going to entrust 30% of our family's compromised assets to someone who has no financial motivation to misuse them, no political connections to exploit them, and no family history that could be leveraged against her." "She's a stranger!" Omar exploded. Standing so quickly, his chair scraped against the floor. "We know nothing about her real motivations, her family's financial situation, her—" "I know exactly who she is," Hassan interrupted. "I know she sends most of her salary to put her nephew through medical school in Accra. I know she's been saving for 2 years to bring her elderly aunt to Saudi Arabia for cataract surgery. I know she turned down a higher-paying position in Dubai because it would have required her to work for a family she felt was exploiting their domestic staff." Omar turned to stare at Mariam, who continued methodically collecting porcelain fragments, without meeting his eyes. "How do you know all of this?" "Because unlike you, son, I ask questions instead of ordering investigations. I listen to people instead of spying on them." Hassan's voice carried a sharp edge that Omar hadn't heard since before the cancer diagnosis. "Mariam has told me about her life because I showed interest in her as a human being, not because I treated her as a potential security threat." Zara finally found her voice. "Father, even if your assessment of her character is accurate, this decision affects the entire family for generations. You can't make it unilaterally. I can, and I have." Hassan reached into the drawer of his bedside table and withdrew a thick legal document bound in blue leather. "The will was executed last week, with proper witnesses and legal oversight. Mariam has already been briefed on her responsibilities." Omar felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. "Last week, you planned this before you told us about the money laundering?" "I planned this because of the money laundering," Hassan corrected. "Omar, in 6 months, maybe less, I'll be dead. When that happens, investigators from half a dozen countries are going to examine every aspect of our business with microscopic precision. If they find evidence of ongoing criminal activity, everything we own could be seized under international asset forfeiture laws. But if the dirty money is held by a charitable trust run by someone with no connection to the original crimes," Zara said slowly, understanding dawning in her voice. "Then it's protected," Hassan confirmed. "The authorities can't seize money that's already being used for humanitarian purposes. They can't prosecute a trustee who had no knowledge of or involvement in the original criminal activity. And most importantly, they can't use guilt by association to destroy the clean portions of our business." Omar began pacing the length of the room, his mind racing through implications and consequences. "This still doesn't explain why it has to be her. There are professional trustees, established charitable organizations, legal firms that specialize in this kind of, all of whom have their own agendas, their own vulnerabilities, their own potential conflicts of interest," Hassan said. "Mariam has none of those complications. She's clean, she's competent, and she's demonstrated integrity in circumstances where it would have been easy to compromise." "What circumstances?" Omar demanded. Hassan looked to Mariam, who finally spoke. "Your father has been testing me," she said simply, her accented English carrying a quiet authority. "Small things at first. He left cash on his bedside table to see if I would take it. He told me false information about family business dealings to see if I would repeat it to staff members. He even had his attorney offer me a substantial bribe to influence his medical care in ways that would accelerate his death. Omar felt sick. Father, I did what was necessary to ensure she could be trusted with something more valuable than money, Hassan said firmly. I tested her integrity, her discretion, and her resistance to corruption. She passed every test. Zara leaned forward in her chair. What exactly will her role involve? How much control are we talking about? Mariam reached into her small leather bag and withdrew a folder. The trust will initially hold approximately $4.2 billion in various assets, real estate, investment accounts, and shares in several subsidiary companies. My mandate is to liquidate these assets over 20 years and distribute the proceeds to healthcare, education, and poverty alleviation programs, with priority given to projects in sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East. 4.2 billion, Omar repeated numbly. You're giving her more money than most countries' annual budgets. I'm giving her the responsibility to transform blood money into something that saves lives. Hassan corrected. It's not wealth she can keep or use for personal benefit. It's a burden as much as a privilege. For the first time since the conversation began, Mariam showed emotion, a slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she understood exactly what Hassan meant. I've spent the past week meeting with lawyers, accountants, and charity administrators, she said. This isn't something I wanted or asked for. It's something I accepted because your father convinced me it was necessary. Necessary for whom? Omar asked bitterly. For us, for you, for your family back in Ghana, who suddenly have access to billions of dollars. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Mariam set down the porcelain fragments she'd been collecting and looked directly at Omar for the first time since his outburst began. Mr. al-Rashid, she said, her voice deadly quiet, I have spent my entire career caring for people who were dying. I have held the hands of children whose parents couldn't afford cancer treatment. I have watched mothers die of preventable diseases because they had no access to basic medical care. I have seen more poverty, more suffering, more injustice than you can imagine. She stood slowly, her modest height somehow making her seem more imposing rather than less. Your father is offering me the opportunity to prevent some of that suffering, not for my benefit, but for people who have no voice, no power, no options. If you think I would compromise that mission for personal gain, then you understand neither me nor the responsibility I'm accepting. Omar felt chastened, but not convinced. It's still an incredible amount of power to place in the hands of someone outside the family. Power that comes with oversight, Hassan interjected. The trust structure includes multiple safeguards. Mariam will work with a board of advisors. All expenditures over a certain amount require multiple approvals, and there are annual audits by independent accounting firms. She's not getting a blank check. She's getting a job, arguably the most difficult and scrutinized job in the humanitarian sector. Zara had been quiet throughout this exchange, but now she spoke thoughtfully. Father, I understand the legal logic of what you're doing. But have you considered the emotional impact? Omar and I have grown up expecting to inherit certain assets. You're not just changing the distribution of wealth, you're changing our family's identity. Hassan's expression softened slightly. Your family's identity was built on blood money, daughter. I'm trying to give you the chance to build a new identity on something cleaner. And what about the business relationships? Omar asked. The partners who provided that dirty money in the first place. They're not going to just accept that their laundered funds are now beyond their reach. Some of these people are dangerous, Father. They don't negotiate, they eliminate problems. For the first time since the conversation began, Hassan looked genuinely worried. That's a complication I'm still working to address. What kind of complication? Zara asked sharply. Hassan exchanged a glance with Mariam before answering. Some of our early partners have been persistent in their expectations of continued cooperation. They view the al-Rashid business as an ongoing resource for their financial needs. "They're threatening us," Omar said, understanding flooding his voice. "That's what this is really about. You're not just trying to clean dirty money, you're trying to get us out from under the control of criminals." "Partners," Hassan corrected, but his tone suggested the distinction was largely semantic. Omar sank back into his chair, overwhelmed by the scope of what his father was revealing. "How long have we been under threat?" "Explicitly. About 6 months. That's when I was diagnosed, and certain individuals began expressing concern about continuity of leadership. They wanted assurances that existing arrangements would continue unchanged after my death." "What kind of assurances?" Zara asked, though her voice suggested she didn't want to know the answer. "Marriage arrangements, primarily," Hassan said quietly. "They have sons, nephews, business associates who they feel would make suitable husbands for you, Zara. Men who could be trusted to maintain the family's traditional flexibility regarding financial partnerships." Zara's face went white. "You're talking about forced marriage to criminals." "I'm talking about proposals that were presented as beneficial business alliances, but carried the clear implication that refusal would not be well received." Omar felt rage building in his chest, not at his father, but at the invisible forces that had apparently been manipulating their family for decades. "Why didn't you tell us this before?" "Because I hoped to resolve it without involving you. But my illness has accelerated certain timelines. Decisions that I thought I would have years to implement now need to happen in months." Mariam, who had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm, finally spoke. "Mr. Hassan, if you're placing me in the middle of a conflict with dangerous people, I need to understand the full scope of what I'm accepting." Hassan looked at her with something approaching paternal affection. "You're not in the middle of anything. Mariam, you're the solution to everything. By placing the compromised assets beyond their reach, we eliminate their leverage over the family. They can't threaten what they can't touch. But they can threaten her," Omar pointed out grimly. "If Mariam controls assets they consider theirs, she becomes their primary target." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Mariam had accepted a position that would make her one of the most powerful humanitarian figures in the world, and potentially one of the most hunted. The revelation about criminal threats had cast a shadow over the al-Rashid compound that seemed to darken every corner despite the blazing Saudi sun. For 2 days following Hassan's bombshell announcement, the family moved through their routines like actors who had forgotten their lines. Omar spent hours in his office, alternating between frantic phone calls to security consultants and long stretches of staring at financial documents that suddenly looked like evidence of crimes rather than proof of success. Mariam continued her duties with Hassan, but even she seemed affected by the weight of what she'd learned. Her movements were more careful, her attention more focused on the compound's security cameras and the faces of staff members she'd previously taken for granted. The comfortable routine they'd established was now layered with an undercurrent, a vigilance that changed everything. It was during one of these tense mornings that Hassan made his next revelation. "There's something else you need to know," he told Mariam as she helped him with his daily medications. They were alone in his bedroom, the morning light filtering through bulletproof windows that Omar had insisted on installing years earlier. "Something that will help you understand why this transition needs to happen quickly." Mariam paused in organizing his pill containers. "What is it?" Hassan reached under his mattress and withdrew a small digital recording device, no larger than a pack of cigarettes. "For the past year, I've been documenting conversations with our business partners. Evidence of their demands, their threats, their expectations for continued cooperation." "You've been recording them without their knowledge?" Mariam asked. her nurse's training making her automatically check his pulse as his stress levels seemed to spike. "I've been protecting my family the only way I know how," Hassan replied. "These recordings prove that Omar and Zara had no knowledge of the criminal aspects of our business. They show that I was coerced into continuing the money laundering arrangements, that any cooperation was done under duress." Mariam took the device, surprised by its weight. "How many conversations are on here?" 47, recorded over the past 14 months. Phone calls, in-person meetings, video conferences, all of them clearly establishing that I was being blackmailed into compliance and that my children were kept deliberately ignorant of the criminal activities. This could protect them legally, Mariam realized. If investigators ever pursue charges, these recordings could prove Omar and Zara were innocent. "More than that," Hassan said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Some of these conversations implicate government officials, international banking executives, and legitimate businessmen in money laundering schemes across 6 countries. This device contains enough evidence to bring down an entire network of corruption." Mariam stared at the innocuous-looking recorder, suddenly understanding why Hassan had seemed so paranoid about security. "Who else knows about this?" "Just you and me. Not Omar, not Zara, not my lawyers. The recordings are encrypted and backed up to a secure server that only I can access. If something happens to me before I can turn this evidence over to the proper authorities, you want me to handle it," Mariam finished. Hassan nodded. "The access codes are in a safety deposit box at the Royal Bank of Saudi Arabia. You'll be given the key along with the other trust documents. Your job won't just be distributing charitable funds. It will be deciding when and how to use this evidence to protect the family." Before Mariam could respond, Omar's voice echoed from the hallway. "Father? I need to speak with you. It's urgent." Hassan quickly motioned for Mariam to hide the recording device in her medical bag. "Not a word," he whispered as Omar entered the room. Omar looked haggard, as if he hadn't slept in days. Behind him stood a man Mariam didn't recognize. Tall, expensively dressed, with the kind of alertness that suggested military or security training. "Father, this is David Chen, our new head of security," Omar said without preamble. "He's former CIA, specializes in protecting high-value targets from international threats. I've hired him to assess our current vulnerabilities." Hassan's expression remained neutral, but Mariam noticed his hands tighten slightly on the bedsheets. "That seems premature, son. We haven't established that there's any immediate danger." Chen stepped forward, his movements economical and precise. "With respect, Mr. al-Rashid, my preliminary assessment suggests otherwise. We've identified at least 3 separate surveillance operations targeting this compound in the past month. Professional-grade equipment, sophisticated techniques. Someone is definitely watching your family." "What kind of surveillance?" Mariam asked, her nurse's protective instincts automatically extending to her patient. Chen's eyes focused on her with uncomfortable intensity. "Telephoto photography from adjacent buildings, electronic eavesdropping devices in your compound's perimeter, and what appears to be GPS tracking on several family vehicles. Most concerning is the pattern. This isn't random criminal activity. Someone is gathering intelligence for a specific purpose." Omar ran his hands through his hair. "Chen thinks we should implement immediate security upgrades, safe rooms, armored vehicles, expanded security staff, full protective protocols. And I think we should be careful not to overreact to threats that may be more perceived than real." Hassan replied calmly, but Mariam could see the tension in his jaw. Chen consulted his tablet. "Sir, I've also identified some concerning patterns. In your household staffing, several employees have family members with significant debt problems, making them vulnerable to outside pressure. There are also some questionable gaps in background checks, particularly for more recent hires. His gaze lingered on Mariam as he said this, the implication clear. Hassan's voice turned cold. Are you suggesting that Ms. Osei represents a security risk? I'm suggesting that anyone with access to your personal space and medical information should be thoroughly vetted, Chen replied diplomatically. Standard protocol for high-risk environments. Mariam felt the familiar sting of being judged as suspicious simply for being African, for being foreign, for being someone who didn't fit the expected profile of people who moved in billionaire circles. But before she could respond, Hassan spoke with quiet authority. Ms. Osei has been more thoroughly vetted than any employee in the history of this household. She has my complete trust and confidence. If you have specific security concerns about the staff members, address those. But do not waste my time or yours questioning someone whose integrity is beyond reproach. Chen nodded stiffly. Of course, sir. I was simply being comprehensive. Be comprehensive about real threats, Hassan replied, and remember that paranoia can be more dangerous than the actual dangers we face. After Chen and Omar left, Hassan sat in thoughtful silence for several minutes. Finally, he turned to Mariam. With an expression of deep concern, "This complicates things," he said quietly. "Chen seems competent, but bringing in outside security increases the risk that our conversations will be monitored. We need to be more careful about what we discuss and where we discuss it." Mariam nodded, acutely aware of the recording device, hidden in her medical bag. "Do you think he suspects something about the recordings?" "I think he suspects everything about everyone, which is probably what makes him good at his job," Hassan replied. "But it also means we need to accelerate our timeline. The evidence needs to be secured before Chen's security upgrades make it impossible to move information in or out of this compound freely." That afternoon, while Omar met with Chen about security protocols, Mariam found herself alone with Zara. In the compound's garden, Hassan's daughter had been unusually quiet since learning about the inheritance plan, and Mariam sensed she needed to talk. "You're frightened," Mariam observed as they sat on a marble bench surrounded by jasmine bushes. Zara nodded slowly. "Not of the threats from father's criminal partners. I'm frightened of what this all means for our family's legacy. Everything I thought I knew about how we built our wealth was apparently a lie." "Not a lie," Mariam said gently. "An incomplete truth. Your father did build a legitimate business empire. The criminal money was just one component of the foundation, a component that could destroy everything if it's exposed," Zara replied bitterly. "Mariam, can I ask you something? When father first approached you about this trustee position, what was your initial reaction?" Mariam considered the question carefully. Shock, then skepticism. Then, when I understood the scope of what he was asking, something close to terror. This isn't a gift he's giving me. It's a burden that will define the rest of my life. Do you ever regret accepting it? Every day, Mariam admitted. But I also think about the medical clinics that could be built with that money, the schools, the clean water projects, the children who could receive treatment for diseases that are completely preventable with proper resources. Your father is offering me the chance to transform something shameful into something meaningful." Zara was quiet for a long moment. "I've been thinking about what father said regarding marriage. Arrangements, about these criminal partners wanting to control our family through forced alliances. That frightens you. It terrifies me. But it also makes me understand why father chose you instead of keeping everything within the family. You can't be controlled through threats to relatives who live in our world. Your family is beyond their reach." Mariam felt a chill despite the afternoon heat. "I hadn't considered that aspect. Father has. He's thought through every angle, every vulnerability, every possible way these people might try to maintain their influence over our assets. By choosing you, he's not just protecting the money, he's protecting all of us. That evening, as Mariam prepared Hassan's nighttime medications, he handed her a small brass key. "This opens the safety deposit box," he said quietly. "Box number 1247 at the Royal Bank. Inside, you'll find access codes for the server containing the recordings, along with detailed instructions for when and how to use them." Mariam pocketed the key. "When should I access the box?" "If something happens to me unexpectedly, or if you determine that the family is in immediate danger from our former partners. The evidence on those recordings could provide law enforcement with everything they need to dismantle the entire criminal network, but using it would also expose our family to potential retaliation. So it's a last resort." "It's a nuclear option," Hassan corrected. "Use it only if you're certain there's no other way to protect Omar and Zara." As Mariam prepared to leave for the evening, Hassan caught her hand. "There's one more thing you should know. Chen ran a more detailed background check on you today, deeper than the standard employment screening. He may have discovered things about your past that even I don't know." Mariam's expression didn't change, but Hassan noticed a slight tension in her shoulders. "What kind of things?" "I don't know yet. But Chen has requested a private meeting with me tomorrow morning. I suspect he believes he's found something that compromises your suitability for the trustee position. And if he has..." Hassan's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "Then we'll deal with it. Together. Whatever he thinks he's discovered, it won't change my decision about the trust, but it might change how quickly we need to implement the transition." As Mariam walked to her car that evening, she felt the weight of the brass key in her pocket and thought about the digital recorder hidden in her medical bag. 47 conversations that could topple governments and destroy criminal networks. The power to redistribute billions of dollars to people who desperately needed help. And now, apparently, some secret from her own past that might threaten everything. She had entered this assignment expecting to care for a dying man and provide comfort to his family. Instead, she found herself at the center of a web of international crime, family secrets, and enough recorded evidence to rewrite the power structures of multiple countries. Tomorrow, she would learn whether her own past contained secrets that could unravel everything Hassan had worked to protect. David Chen arrived at Hassan's bedroom the next morning carrying a manila folder thick enough to contain someone's entire life history. His expression was unreadable, the practiced neutrality of a man who had delivered sensitive intelligence to heads of state and corporate executives across 3 continents. But Mariam, who was adjusting Hassan's IV line when Chen entered, noticed the slight tension in his jaw that suggested whatever he'd discovered was significant. "Mr. al-Rashid," Chen began formally, "I've completed the comprehensive background investigation you requested on Ms. Osei. There are several matters we need to discuss privately." Hassan glanced at Mariam, who was finishing her medical tasks, with deliberate calm. "Ms. Osei stays. Anything that concerns her position in this household concerns me directly, and I prefer transparency to whispered conferences." Chen hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with conducting sensitive intelligence briefings in front of the subject. "Sir, some of this information is delicate. It might be better discussed here and now," Hassan interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to making billion-dollar decisions without second-guessing himself. "Proceed." Chen opened the folder and consulted the first document. "Ms. Osei, the employment history you provided was accurate but incomplete. You worked at several hospitals in Ghana before coming to Saudi Arabia, but you omitted your employment. At the Koforidua Regional Hospital from 2018 to 2019. Mariam's hands paused momentarily in their work, but her voice remained steady. That position ended under difficult circumstances. I didn't feel it was relevant to my qualifications for private nursing. Difficult circumstances, Chen repeated, flipping to another page. According to hospital records, you were suspended, pending investigation into allegations of medical malpractice. A patient under your care died unexpectedly during a routine procedure. Hassan's eyes sharpened, but he remained silent, allowing Chen to continue. The patient was Rebecca Asante, age 42, mother of 3 children. She was admitted for gallbladder surgery, a routine laparoscopic procedure with minimal risk. During the operation, she experienced an unexpected reaction to anesthesia and went into cardiac arrest. Despite 47 minutes of resuscitation efforts, she was pronounced dead. Mariam set down the medical equipment and faced Chen directly. Rebecca Asante died because the hospital's anesthesia equipment hadn't been properly maintained in 18 months. The vaporizer delivered a concentration of sevoflurane that was 3 times higher than what the monitors indicated. When I realized what was happening and tried to alert the surgical team, the head surgeon told me to stay in my lane and focus on my nursing duties. But you didn't stay quiet, Chen continued, consulting his notes. You filed a formal complaint with the hospital administration, alleging negligent maintenance of critical equipment and inadequate safety protocols. I did what any responsible healthcare worker should do when they witness preventable medical errors, Mariam replied firmly. Chen flipped another page. The hospital's internal investigation concluded that equipment failure was indeed the primary cause of Mrs. Asante's death. 3 senior staff members were terminated, including the head surgeon and the anesthesia technician. The hospital paid a substantial settlement to the Asante family. Hassan leaned forward slightly. And Ms. Osei's role in this outcome? She was vindicated completely, Chen admitted. The investigation found that her actions during the emergency were appropriate and that her subsequent whistleblowing may have prevented similar deaths. However, the hospital administration encouraged her resignation. Apparently, some staff members felt she had violated the informal code of loyalty by reporting the incident. Mariam's expression hardened. I was told that my continued presence would create uncomfortable working conditions for the remaining surgical team. They offered me an excellent reference letter and 3 months severance pay if I agreed to seek employment elsewhere. So you came to Saudi Arabia, Chen continued, but there's more to that transition than a simple job change. According to immigration records, your visa application was sponsored by the Ghana-Saudi Medical Exchange Program, a humanitarian initiative that places African healthcare workers in underserved Saudi hospitals. That's correct, Mariam confirmed. Though Hassan noticed a slight tension in her voice, Chen consulted another document. What's interesting is that this program was partially funded by a charitable foundation called the Desert Rose Trust, which distributed grants totaling $47 million to medical programs across West Africa and the Middle East between 2015 and 2020. Hassan's expression didn't change, but Mariam saw his hands tighten almost imperceptibly on the bedsheets. The Desert Rose Trust, Chen continued, was administered through a complex network of holding companies, but the ultimate source of funding appears to have been the al-Rashid Charitable Foundation. The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of medical equipment. Hassan stared at Chen with the calculating expression of a man rapidly reassessing everything he thought he knew about a situation. You're suggesting that Ms. Osei's presence here is not coincidental, Hassan said slowly. I'm suggesting that her path to this employment was facilitated possibly without her knowledge, by funding that originated from your own charitable activities, Chen replied. The Ghana-Saudi Medical Exchange Program specifically recruited nurses with experience in end-of-life care and placed them in positions with wealthy Saudi families who required palliative care services. Mariam felt the blood drain from her face as the implications sank in. You're saying that I was selected for this position? That my entire journey here was manipulated? Chen shrugged. I'm saying the coincidences are statistically improbable. A nurse with your specific qualifications, placed through a program funded by the al-Rashid family, arriving at this household precisely when a palliative care specialist was needed. It raises questions about whether this arrangement was as random as it appeared. Hassan was quiet for a long moment, his sharp mind working through the connections. Finally, he looked directly at Mariam. Did you know about the funding source when you applied to the exchange program? Of course not, Mariam replied, her voice carrying hurt and confusion. I applied because it offered the opportunity to work with advanced medical technology while earning enough money to support my family. The program coordinator never mentioned specific funding sources. But someone did know, Hassan mused. Someone orchestrated this entire arrangement. Chen nodded grimly. That's where the investigation gets more complicated. The Desert Rose Trust was dissolved in 2020, shortly after your father's cancer diagnosis. Became known to his inner circle. All records were sealed, and the administrators scattered to various positions around the world. But I was able to track down one former employee. He produced a digital recorder from his jacket pocket. This is a phone interview I conducted yesterday with Dr. Sarah Mensah, who served as the program's medical director from 2018 to 2020. Chen pressed play, and a woman's voice filled the room, speaking with a Ghanaian accent similar to Mariam's. The placement program was very specific about candidate qualifications. We weren't just looking for qualified nurses, we were looking for individuals with particular character traits: integrity, discretion, resistance to corruption. The candidates underwent psychological evaluations disguised as routine health screenings. Hassan's eyes never left Mariam's face as the recording continued. There was definitely guidance about placement priorities. Certain families, certain medical situations were flagged as high-priority placements. The al-Rashid family was at the top of that list, though we were never told why. Chen stopped the recording. Dr. Mensah also mentioned that candidate selection involved extensive background checks that went far beyond standard employment screening. They were specifically looking for individuals whose personal histories demonstrated moral courage under pressure. Like reporting medical malpractice despite personal cost, Hassan said quietly. Exactly. Ms. Osei's handling of the Rebecca Asante case apparently made her an ideal candidate for whatever this program was really designed to accomplish. Mariam sank into the chair beside Hassan's bed, overwhelmed by the revelation that her entire professional journey had been guided by invisible hands. Who would have had access to my medical malpractice case? Those records were supposed to be confidential. Chen consulted his notes again. The hospital's legal department hired an international consulting firm to handle the investigation and settlement. That firm, Meridian Risk Solutions, has connections to several intelligence agencies and private security organizations. You're talking about espionage, Hassan said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. Someone has been manipulating my family's charitable activities to place agents in our household. Not agents, Chen corrected. At least, not in the traditional sense. Ms. Osei doesn't appear to have any training or connections that would suggest she's working for a foreign intelligence service. But her placement here was definitely orchestrated by someone with significant resources and detailed knowledge of your family's situation. Mariam stood abruptly, anger replacing confusion in her voice. "I am not anyone's agent or manipulation tool. I came here to do my job, to provide care for a dying man and comfort for his family. If someone used me to accomplish some other agenda, I'm as much a victim of that manipulation as you are." Hassan studied her face intently. "The question is whether you're truly unaware of being manipulated, or whether you're simply an excellent actress." The accusation hit Mariam like a physical blow. After weeks of building trust and mutual respect, Hassan was questioning her fundamental honesty. "How can you ask me that? After everything we've discussed, all the trust you've placed in me?" "Because 47 conversations are at stake," Hassan said quietly. "Because my children's lives may depend on my ability to distinguish between genuine loyalty and sophisticated deception." Chen cleared his throat. "There's one more thing. Dr. Mensah mentioned that the program's real sponsors were particularly interested in nurses who had lost patients to preventable deaths. They believed such experiences would create individuals with strong motivations to prevent unnecessary suffering, even if it meant challenging powerful institutions, or individuals who could be emotionally manipulated through guilt and a desire for redemption," Hassan added grimly. Mariam felt tears of frustration building behind her eyes. "So now, my genuine desire to help people is being reframed as psychological manipulation." "I'm sorry, Mariam," Hassan said, and for the first time since Chen's arrival, his voice carried genuine regret. "But I have to consider every possibility. Too much depends on getting this right." Chen closed his folder. "I recommend a waiting period before finalizing any trust arrangements. At minimum, we should investigate the current whereabouts of the other program administrators and determine who had the authority to orchestrate Ms. Osei's placement." Hassan was quiet for several minutes, staring out the bulletproof windows at gardens that suddenly seemed less like sanctuary and more like a carefully constructed stage. Finally, he turned back to Mariam. "I need to ask you directly, is there anything about your journey to this position that you haven't told me? Any conversations? Any instructions? Any suggestions about how to handle your responsibilities here?" Mariam met his gaze steadily. "Nothing. I applied to a medical exchange program, was accepted based on my qualifications, and was placed with your family because you needed a palliative care nurse. If there were other agendas at work, I was kept ignorant of them." "And the trustee position, when I first mentioned it, had you ever considered the possibility of managing a charitable trust?" "Never. The very idea terrified me, and it still does. I accepted because you convinced me it was necessary, not because it fulfilled some predetermined plan." Hassan nodded slowly, but Chen could see doubt clouding his features. The security expert had done his job. He'd uncovered information that cast shadows over what had seemed like a straightforward situation. But in doing so, he'd also poisoned the well of trust that Hassan and Mariam had spent weeks building. "We'll continue this investigation," Hassan decided. "But for now, everything remains as planned. Ms. Osei will continue her duties, and the trust arrangements will proceed on schedule." Chen looked surprised. "Sir, given these revelations, don't you think—" "I think that manipulation works both ways," Hassan interrupted. "If someone orchestrated Mariam's placement here, they chose well. She has proven herself through actions, not just credentials. Whether her journey was guided or accidental, her character remains constant." But as Chen left the room and Mariam returned to her medical duties, both of them could feel that something fundamental had shifted. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild. And with time running out and dangerous people watching from the shadows, the al-Rashid family could afford few more cracks in their already fragile foundation. The atmosphere in the al-Rashid compound had grown toxic over the past 3 days. Ever since Chen's revelations about Mariam's orchestrated placement, the family moved through their daily routines, like actors in a play where everyone had forgotten their lines. Omar avoided direct conversation with Mariam, communicating through terse instructions delivered via household staff. Zara watched her with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. Most painfully for Mariam, Hassan had retreated into the formal politeness he'd shown during their first meeting, asking about his medication schedule and vital signs, but avoiding the personal conversations that had become the foundation of their relationship. Mariam found herself checking over her shoulder more frequently, hyper-aware of the security cameras that Chen had informed her were now being monitored. Round the clock, by a team of professionals in a command center Omar had established in the compound's basement. Every movement was being analyzed, every conversation potentially recorded and scrutinized for signs of deception or hidden agenda. It was during this tense period that everything changed. The phone call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, jarring Hassan from the fitful sleep that had become his norm since the chemotherapy had resumed. Omar answered on the second ring, his voice immediately alert despite the hour, a skill developed through years of handling international business across multiple time zones. "Mr. al-Rashid," the voice was calm, professional, with an accent that suggested Eastern European origins. "This is Dmitry Volkov. I believe your father has mentioned me." Omar's blood turned to ice. Volkov was one of the names Hassan had reluctantly shared during their discussions about criminal partners, a Russian oligarch whose money laundering operations stretched from Moscow to Monaco, with tentacles reaching into legitimate businesses across 3 continents. "Mr. Volkov," Omar said carefully, "it's quite late. Perhaps we could schedule a more appropriate time to—" "I'm calling because the appropriate time has passed," Volkov interrupted. "Your father has been avoiding my calls for 6 weeks. His health issues, while regrettable, do not suspend our business obligations." Omar was wide awake now, adrenaline sharpening his focus. "What obligations are you referring to?" "The quarterly transfers that were due last month. The accommodation arrangements that your father agreed to maintain regardless of his personal circumstances. The assurances he provided regarding continuity of our partnership. I'll need to discuss this with my father in the morning." "You'll discuss it with him now," Volkov said, his voice carrying the quiet menace of a man accustomed to immediate compliance. "I'm currently in Riyadh. I'll be at your compound in 30 minutes for a face-to-face conversation. This matter requires resolution tonight." The line went dead, leaving Omar staring at his phone in the darkness of his bedroom. Beside him, Layla stirred sleepily. "Who was that?" she mumbled. "Trouble," Omar replied, already reaching for his clothes. 25 minutes later, Omar sat beside his father's bed, while Mariam checked Hassan's vital signs with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. Chen stood near the door, his posture suggesting he was ready for violence, despite the late hour and unexpected circumstances. "Volkov is coming here?" Hassan asked, his voice weaker than usual, but his mind clearly sharp. "Now?" He said 30 minutes, and it's been 25, Omar confirmed. "Father, what exactly did you promise these people? What are they expecting from us?" Hassan closed his eyes briefly. "Monthly transfers of $200 million through our Cayman Islands subsidiary. The money gets layered through legitimate investments before being returned to their European accounts, clean and untraceable. 200 million per month?" Omar felt dizzy. "That's 2.4 billion annually. We're talking about the majority of our liquid assets. Now you understand why the trust arrangement is necessary," Hassan replied grimly. "Those assets need to be beyond their reach before they realize I'm planning to sever our relationship permanently." Mariam, who had been quietly monitoring Hassan's blood pressure, suddenly spoke. "Mr. Hassan, your heart rate is dangerously elevated. This level of stress could trigger—" "Ms. Osei," Chen interrupted from his position by the door. "Perhaps you should wait outside during this family discussion." Hassan's eyes flashed with sudden anger. "She stays. If Volkov is coming here, if our family is about to be threatened directly, then the person who will inherit responsibility for protecting our assets needs to understand exactly what she's inheriting." The sound of vehicles in the driveway interrupted further discussion. Through the bulletproof windows, they could see the headlights of 3 black SUVs, their engines running, doors remaining closed, a show of force designed to communicate that this was not a social visit. Omar's phone buzzed with a text from his gate security. 6 individuals, all armed, requesting immediate access. "Advise. Let them in," Hassan said before Omar could respond. "But keep our own security visible. I want Volkov to understand that threats work both ways." 5 minutes later, Dmitry Volkov entered Hassan's bedroom with the confidence of a man accustomed to intimidating heads of state. He was smaller than Omar had expected, perhaps 5'8", with silver hair and pale blue eyes that seemed to catalogue and evaluate everything they saw. His suit was perfectly tailored, his movements economical, and his smile completely devoid of warmth. "Hassan," he said without preamble, as if greeting an old friend, "you look terrible. The cancer is progressing quickly." "Dmitry," Hassan replied evenly, "you look exactly the same. Time has been kinder to you than to me." Volkov's gaze swept the room, taking in Omar's anxious expression, Chen's alert posture, and Mariam's presence beside the medical equipment. "I see you've surrounded yourself with new faces. The next generation, I assume, plus professional protection and medical support." "My son Omar, who will be taking over business operations," Hassan said. "My security consultant, Mr. Chen, and my nurse, Mariam Osei." Volkov's attention lingered on Mariam for several seconds longer than necessary. "African, Ghanaian by the accent. Interesting choice for intimate medical care, given the sensitivity of your condition." The comment carried undertones that made Omar's jaw clench, but Hassan responded calmly. "Ms. Osei has proven herself extremely capable and completely trustworthy." "I'm sure she has," Volkov smiled thinly. "But trustworthiness is a relative concept, isn't it? Trust depends entirely on understanding where someone's true loyalties lie." He turned his attention back to Hassan. "Which brings me to why I'm here. Our financial arrangement has experienced some irregularities recently. Transfers that were due haven't been processed. Communications that should have been routine have been ignored. This concerns me, Hassan, because consistency is the foundation of our partnership." "Our partnership has always been temporary," Hassan replied. "I've fulfilled my obligations for 7 years. With my death approaching, it's time to transition to a different arrangement." Volkov laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Death doesn't dissolve business commitments, my friend. It transfers them. Your son will inherit your obligations along with your assets." "No," Omar said firmly, speaking for the first time since Volkov's arrival. "I won't be honoring any illegal financial arrangements. The legitimate business will continue, but money laundering operations end with my father's generation." Volkov's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "That's disappointing and naive. You seem to misunderstand the nature of your situation." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a tablet computer, swiping to display what appeared to be surveillance photos. "Your sister Zara leaving the British Embassy last week. Your wife's shopping trip to the Gold Souk, where she spent 47 minutes browsing jewelry while our associates catalogued her preferences. Your own route to and from your office, which follows the same pattern Tuesday through Thursday, creating predictable opportunities for interaction." Omar felt sick as he realized the implications. "You're threatening my family." "I'm illustrating the interconnected nature of our relationship," Volkov corrected. Your father understood this principle when he first accepted our partnership. Mutual benefit requires mutual vulnerability. Hassan struggled to sit up straighter, his voice gaining strength despite his physical weakness. Dimitri, whatever threats you're planning to make, direct them at me. My children had no involvement in our arrangement and bear no responsibility for its continuation. But they will bear the consequences of its termination, Volkov replied smoothly. Unless, of course, we can reach a new understanding that acknowledges the changed circumstances. Chen stepped forward slightly, his hand moving to the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. Volkov noticed the movement and smiled approvingly. Excellent. Professional security, ready to use force to protect the family. But tell me, Mr. Chen, how many of my associates do you think are currently positioned around this compound? How confident are you in your ability to protect 3 family members simultaneously if circumstances become fluid? Confident enough, Chen replied tersely. Volkov turned back to Hassan. I have a proposal that might resolve our situation amicably. The monthly transfers will continue as scheduled, but the amount will be reduced to 150 million to account for your reduced circumstances. In exchange, I'll accept your daughter as collateral for the arrangement's continuation. Collateral? Omar demanded. Marriage to my nephew Alexei, a bright young man, Harvard-educated, with significant experience in international finance. The union would formalize our partnership while ensuring that any future business decisions take our interests into account. Zara's voice came from the doorway where she had apparently been listening. I would rather die than marry into a criminal organization. Volkov turned to study her with the same calculating expression he'd used on everyone else. That's certainly one option, Ms. al-Rashid. Though I think you'll find the alternative I'm proposing much more comfortable. The threat was unmistakable. Hassan's hands clenched into fists despite his weakness. Get out of my house, Dimitri. Our business relationship is terminated. Find other partners for your money laundering operations. I'm afraid that's not possible, Volkov replied sadly. You see, Hassan, you know too much about our operations. Your cooperation was voluntary for 7 years, but your silence will be mandatory for the rest of your life and beyond. He stood to leave, but paused at the foot of Hassan's bed. You have 48 hours to transfer the overdue funds and confirm the marriage arrangement. If both conditions aren't met by Thursday midnight, we'll be forced to implement more direct forms of persuasion. As Volkov moved toward the door, his gaze fell on Mariam one final time. Ms. Osei, isn't it? I'm curious. How long have you been working for this family? 3 weeks, Mariam replied quietly. 3 weeks, Volkov repeated thoughtfully, just long enough to gain access to the family's most intimate medical and financial information. Tell me, have you been asked to assist with any unusual documentation, any legal arrangements that might affect the family's asset distribution? Mariam's silence was answer enough. Volkov smiled with genuine amusement. Fascinating. Hassan, you've been even busier than I thought. I do hope Ms. Osei understands that her new responsibilities may come with complications she hadn't anticipated. After Volkov and his associates left, the room fell into stunned silence. Finally, Hassan spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Mariam, I need you to go to the bank tomorrow morning, retrieve the contents of the safety deposit box, and prepare to implement the contingency plans immediately. We're out of time. Father, Omar said desperately, we can't let them threaten Zara. Whatever they want, what they want is control of our family for the rest of our lives, Hassan interrupted. That's not negotiable. We implement the trust transfer immediately. We turn the recordings over to international authorities, and we disappear until Volkov's organization is dismantled. And if the authorities can't protect us? Zara asked. Hassan looked at Mariam, who still stood beside his bed despite everything that had transpired. "Then we hope that the person we've entrusted with our family's future proves worthy of that trust, regardless of how she came to be here." The next 47 hours would determine whether Hassan's gamble on a Ghanaian nurse would save his family or destroy them all. 46 hours after Volkov's ultimatum, Hassan al-Rashid died peacefully in his sleep. Mariam found him at 6:23 a.m. during her routine morning check, his face serene for the first time since his diagnosis. The cancer had finally won its battle, but Hassan had managed one final strategic victory. He had died on his own terms, 1 hour and 37 minutes before Volkov's deadline. The funeral arrangements happened with the swift efficiency of a family accustomed to managing crises. Within 12 hours, Hassan's body was prepared according to Islamic tradition and buried in the al-Rashid family cemetery, attended by government ministers, oil executives, and diplomats who had no idea they were mourning a man who had spent his final weeks orchestrating the downfall of an international criminal network. Volkov attended the funeral. He stood in the back of the gathering, a picture of respectful mourning, his presence a silent reminder to Omar and Zara that Hassan's death had not resolved their situation. If anything, it had made them more vulnerable. The protection of Hassan's reputation and connections was now gone, leaving them exposed to whatever retribution Volkov chose to implement. The will reading was scheduled for the following morning. At the offices of Hassan's longtime attorney, Faisal Mansouri, the al-Rashid family gathered in the mahogany-paneled conference room, joined by Mariam at Omar's reluctant invitation, and Chen, whose security concerns had only intensified since Hassan's death. What they discovered would change everything. "We begin with the formal will," Mansouri announced, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. al-Rashid left specific instructions for me to play a video recording he made 3 days before his death." The large monitor at the end of the conference table flickered to life, revealing Hassan sitting in his bedroom, looking directly into the camera with the sharp intelligence that had characterized his business career. "If you're watching this recording, then I am dead, and you are about to learn the truth about everything," Hassan began, his recorded voice filling the room. "Omar, Zara, I know the revelations about our family's criminal connections have shaken your trust in me. I know my decision to name Mariam as trustee has created doubt and confusion. Today, you'll understand why both were necessary." He paused, seeming to look directly at each person in the room. "Mariam, 7 years ago, when you were working at the rural clinic in Ghana, you filed a report about substandard medical equipment that was being sold to African hospitals by a European medical supply company. That report eventually reached international investigators and led to a massive fraud prosecution." Mariam's eyes widened in shock. She remembered the incident, a routine equipment inspection that had revealed dangerous irregularities, but she had never learned about any international consequences. Hassan continued, "The medical supply company was a front for money laundering operations. The substandard equipment was deliberately designed to fail, creating emergency procurement situations that justified inflated payments to shell companies controlled by criminal organizations. Your report didn't just save lives, it helped expose a billion-dollar international fraud network." Omar and Zara turned to stare at Mariam, who looked as stunned as they felt. Dmitry Volkov was one of the primary financial backers of that medical supply operation. Hassan's recording continued. "When it was shut down, thanks to Mariam's investigation, he lost over $300 million. He's been trying to identify the source of that investigation for 7 years. The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place with sickening clarity. The Desert Rose Trust, the medical exchange program, Mariam's placement in our household. None of it was manipulated by my enemies. It was orchestrated by my allies. International law enforcement agencies have been working for years to build a case against Volkov's organization. They needed someone inside his financial network who could gather evidence without arousing suspicion. Hassan smiled slightly on screen. They also needed someone with the moral courage to use that evidence appropriately when the time came. Mariam, you were never an unwitting pawn. You were always their first choice for this mission, because you had already proven you would risk everything to expose corruption, even when it cost you personally. Mariam felt the room spinning around her. I never knew. No one ever told me, because the operation required genuine relationships and authentic trust, Hassan explained in the recording. If you had known you were working undercover, your behavior would have been different. If I had known you were placed deliberately, my reactions would have been calculated rather than instinctive. The investigation succeeded because everyone involved acted according to their true character. Chen leaned forward. Mr. al-Rashid, are you saying that international law enforcement has been conducting a 7-year operation using your family as cover? Hassan nodded on screen. With my full knowledge and cooperation. The criminal partnerships I described were real, but I was working with authorities from the beginning to document and expose them. The 47 recorded conversations Mariam now possesses aren't just evidence. They're the culmination of a years-long investigation that will dismantle Volkov's entire network. But the threats, Zara protested. Volkov's ultimatum about the marriage arrangement was his final mistake, Hassan replied, by threatening my family directly and on American soil. Chen's security system has been recording everything since Volkov's visit. He's given international authorities everything. They need to arrest him on terrorism charges. As if summoned by Hassan's words, the conference room doors opened to admit 6 individuals in dark suits, led by a woman with graying hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. I'm Agent Sarah Chen, FBI International Organized Crime Division, she announced, producing her credentials. Mr. and Ms. al-Rashid, you're both safe. Dmitry Volkov and 17 members of his organization were arrested this morning in coordinated raids across 4 countries. Omar sank back in his chair, overwhelmed. This entire thing was a law enforcement operation. Your father volunteered to serve as a cooperating witness after investigators approached him 3 years ago, Agent Chen explained. His business relationships with criminal organizations made him invaluable for gathering evidence, but his cancer diagnosis accelerated our timeline considerably. She turned to Mariam. Ms. Osei, you've been working under FBI protection for the past month, though you weren't aware of it. The security measures implemented by David Chen, who is also one of our agents, were designed to protect you as much as the al-Rashid family. Mariam looked at the man she'd known as a private security consultant. Your FBI? David Chen is my real name, but yes, I'm a federal agent, he confirmed. I've been coordinating with your father to ensure your safety while you gathered the final pieces of evidence we needed. Attorney Mansouri cleared his throat. Perhaps we should proceed with the actual will reading. What followed was even more surprising than everything that had preceded it. Hassan had indeed established the charitable trust as described, placing $4.2 billion under Mariam's control for humanitarian distribution. But he had also left specific instructions that revealed the true scope of his planning. The money you'll be distributing isn't dirty money being cleaned, Mansouri read from the will. It's restitution money recovered from criminal organizations, awarded to victims of the fraud networks that Volkov and others operated. Your job isn't to launder stolen funds. It's to return stolen money to the communities that were harmed by these operations. Omar shook his head in amazement. Father turned us into a victim compensation program? More than that, Agent Chen said. The al-Rashid Charitable Trust will serve as a model for how recovered criminal assets can be distributed efficiently to affected populations. This operation will influence international law enforcement policy for decades. But Hassan had saved his greatest surprise for last. Mariam, Mansouri continued reading, in recognition of the courage you've shown throughout this investigation and the personal risks you've accepted to see justice done, I'm also leaving you a personal bequest of $50 million with no restrictions on its use. You've earned the right to choose your own future. Mariam stared at the attorney in shock. $50 million for me personally? Your father was quite specific about this, Mansouri confirmed. He felt that someone who had repeatedly sacrificed personal gain for moral principles deserved to benefit from doing the right thing. 6 months later, Mariam stood in the courtyard of a newly constructed medical clinic in Kumasi, Ghana, watching children play in a space that had been funded by Hassan's bequest. The clinic bore a small bronze plaque, Rebecca Asante Memorial Hospital, in honor of preventable deaths that led to preventing others. Omar and Zara had become her closest allies in managing the charitable trust, their family bond strengthened by shared survival and shared purpose. The al-Rashid business empire continued to thrive, now completely clean and focused on legitimate investments in renewable energy and medical technology. Dmitry Volkov was serving a life sentence in federal prison, and his criminal network had been completely dismantled. 17 countries had recovered over $12 billion in stolen assets, much of which was being distributed through programs modeled on Hassan's trust. As Mariam watched a young nurse, trained at the new medical school she'd also funded, carefully checking equipment that met international safety standards, she thought about the chain of events that had brought her here. A routine equipment inspection in a rural clinic had led to exposing international fraud, which had led to an undercover operation, which had led to caring for a dying man who turned out to be the most unlikely ally she could have imagined. Hassan. Al-Rashid had been right about one thing. Dignity mattered more than diplomas. But sometimes, when the right person with the right principles ended up in the right place at the right time, both dignity and justice could prevail together. Her phone buzzed with a text from Omar. Trust board meeting next week. We've identified 3 more medical equipment fraud operations that need investigating. Are you ready for the next mission? Mariam smiled and typed back, always, because some responsibilities, once accepted, become a calling that lasts a lifetime. Up. Next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.